let me go ahead and welcome all the people who are here. We're welcoming you as you come to this session to go ahead and share your name, who you are in the chat for this session, and then also share a space that's important to you, a park, a coast, a trail, because we are here to talk about Latino heritage sites, and we have an incredible lineup to speak to this area. I would like to mention for Green Latinos, as a Latina, for all of us here just as people, this is such an important workshop because the natural world is a part of our lives. And I think of as part of my Latina heritage, the land, the nature around us is truly a part of who we are. We don't necessarily say, I need to have XYZ equipment or XYZ experience to consider myself a part of nature. I'm a part of nature every time I let my cat outside or go garden or walk to the library. I think that spaces and nature are such a part of my life. And I tend to find that's true of my Latinx, BIPOC, and all of my community. We really care about these spaces. And so we have here people today who are champions for the parks, for the public spaces, for making sure that people have access and are represented in these spaces. And I'm just honored to have that conversation with them. So we're going to be beginning the session with a short video, and then I'll come back on and introduce our speakers. But if you don't mind sharing that video, we'll introduce you all to the parks here. And I know I've given our text a lot to do, so let's see. There it comes up. Thank you so much for sharing. So you can see in the video, I have a strong affiliation for our national parks. I've definitely enjoyed the beauty of many, and they're incredible spaces. Each one is unique, and I'm lucky that I've been able to visit quite a few. But to have champions for these spaces here with us today is remarkable. I see in the chat, people are starting to converse about the importance of these spaces to them as well. So I'm glad to see that the community, falls in the same place on those. And I'd like to introduce the three people we have here with us today. We're working on getting the third up on stage with us right now. But just so you're aware of what incredible people we have with us. With me right now is Noemi Lujan Perez, and she is currently supporting the Latino Heritage Fund program for the National Park Foundation. And she has an incredible portfolio promoting outreach and relationship management for African Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic or Latinx communities, the LGBT population, and women audiences, to just name a few. Her education and experiences promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion are phenomenal, and we're so grateful to have her here. Also on screen with me is Ruth Hernandez Prescott, and she is the National Park Foundation Chief of Staff and part of the National Park Foundation since 2014. As Chief of Staff, she advises the President, Board, and Executive Team on strategies to enhance the operating efficiency of the National Parks Foundation, and she works hand in hand with the National Park Service leadership to assure appropriate coordination of the Foundation's efforts on behalf of the National Park Service. So two phenomenal people. I also want to let you know that we are joined here as well by Raymond David Vela, and hopefully we will get him up here shortly, but he is a National Parks Foundation Park Council member and a 30-year career veteran of the National Park Service. David retired as Deputy Director of the National Park Service in August 2020. And he has worn an incredible and impressive number of hats, both within and outside of the National Park Service and on both a federal and state level. He has so many roles, I didn't know what to highlight, but I have to say he was at one point the superintendent of Grand Teton National Park, among his many achievements. And that is one of my favorite places in the whole world. So I definitely wanted to take note of that. He is also the recent author of Ola Ranger, My Journey Through the National Parks. And I'm so grateful to have the three of them here with us. So we'll hopefully have him join us soon, but I'm going to pass it off to Noemi.
Thank you, Rosemary, and thank you, Green Latinos. Mark Magana, Mariana, who have worked tirelessly with us behind the scenes, and Rosemary yourself. I am actually joining you all from South Los Angeles, California, or as many of the Green Latinos in the room have indicated, Tongva land. I would briefly share that I too have an interesting heritage, right, that reflects the Latino heritage sites. My mother immigrated from Mexico. She crossed the border inside of the trunk of a car with a second degree education. My father is a direct descendant of the Lujan clan that dates themselves back to 1647 in the American Southwest, right? So it is an extreme honor to work with the Latino Heritage Sites, the National Park Foundation, and really to get to mix and mingle with power people like Ruth and David. And I want to highlight who Ruth is. And Ruth had to be convinced to come on here. Ruth is a Tejana, born and raised. She is a power Latina. She is one of the few chief of staffs, right, that support government or public lands agencies in Washington, D.C. or the nation. And as for those of you who are on the Hill, know there are few Latinos, Latinas in chief of staff positions on the Hill. So I wanted all of you to see and know who Ruth is and understand the resource she is, not just in her respective role with National Parks Foundation, but basically she's an influencer, a power shaker, right, within the National Park system, with board members, park council members, and the National Park Service. So much ado and kudos and respects to Ruth. And yeah, you're important, right? And I understand you have the world on your shoulders, but it's important for the Green Latino community to know who you are. Hopefully David will join us soon. But for those of you who have interfaced with David Vela was for us our first Latino to be nominated to serve as director of the National Park Service. And he has a wealth of history and knowledge that he plans on sharing with us. But just a little bit of history with the Latino heritage sites. I would actually be interested to see any of you type in the names of national parks that you have visited, either with family or with friends, any time in your life, whether as a child or in recent history. But there are over 400 national parks in our nations, in the National Park Service system. And David will gladly tell you and tell anyone that over half of them, looks like David is joining. There's an echo, David. Once we get David on board, we will get him talking. But David will tell you at the length and are you there, David?
Yeah.
David.
Can you see me?
Not yet.
Not
but we
yet.
can hear you.
Okay. Well, we'll try that for now.
We're working through it. So for those of you in the room, I see Rosemary put down Teton, Grand Teton. David, I think you were a superintendent at Grand Teton, right?
Correct.
David, it is always an honor to have you. More Latinos and Green Latinos should know who you are, and you have a great relationship and history with Green Latinos and Mark Magana in particular. So if you will, if you're willing and able to right now, if you can come in and give us some of the history on the range of the Latino footprint in national parks, and tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
Absolutely. And I apologize, folks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Right.
Good. And I even wore a suit and tie for Mark. I haven't worn a suit and tie since I retired from the Park Service a year and a half ago, so he missed out. But I am really honored and excited to be part of this National Virtual Summit with Mark and my dear friend and Green Latinos to discuss, Latino heritage sites within the National Park Service, but also giving me the opportunity to thank Green Latinos, for their passion in addressing environmental and resource issues while serving the interest of our Latino community. Anytime we can come together to celebrate the role national parks play in preserving our nation's and Latino history and heritage is a great day for me. Our national parks have a very special place in my heart and frankly inspired a lifelong commitment to public service for two generations of Velas in my family. It all began for me on a trip to Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks with my parents and my younger brother and sister in the late 1960s. We're from the farmlands of Southeast Texas. And needless to say that when we arrived to Grand Teton and Yellowstone, we were in awe of the landscape, of the wildlife, but frankly, the lack of visitors and staff who did not look like us back in the 1960s. And to be frank, it was quite intimidating, but we soon settled down and realized that these magnificent parks were part of our American birthright as well. So as a teenager, it soon became apparent to me what I wanted to do in my life when I saw a ranger getting ready to go on backcountry patrol wearing a Smokey the Bear hat, a revolver with a pack horse in the back, getting ready to go on patrol. And I saw myself as a teenager doing the same. And thankfully, I did. I began my career in the National Park Service in 1981 at the missions in San Antonio, Texas, San Antonio Missions National Historical Park, where I became a permanent park ranger. And frankly, we were the first park rangers to open up that new national park site. In fact, the first superintendent was Jose Cisneros, and the mayor at that time in San Antonio was Henry Cisneros. So we had it made. Over 90% of the staff, the permanent staff in San Antonio, were Latino. And it made perfect sense because we were the first rangers to be in San Antonio. And frankly, our uniforms looked very much like the United States Border Patrol. And I remember when we first put on the uniforms and working within the mission communities, things didn't quite go so well. And it took a while for us to explain the role that national park rangers play. And to do it in Spanish and to do it within our own culture really helped to, I think, transform that beginning relationship that serves the park today. But while in San Antonio, I also learned so much about my Latino heritage and history, not only there, but through other park assignments in the many decades that followed. And over 35 years later, and in 2018, I was nominated by the President of the United States to serve as the 19th Director of the National Park Service. And I went through the Senate confirmation process, becoming the first Latino to ever be nominated and the highest ranking Latino in the agency's history. But even with that said, I give kudos to all of the Latinos and Latinas going back to the early 1930s that paved the way for this Latino, that opened doors of opportunity, that proved that Latinos could wear the green and gray, that we can work in iconic national parks like Grand Teton National Park. And the irony for me, since the 1960s, was being the 21st superintendent in the very national park that changed my life at Grand Teton National Park. So one of the other privileges that I've had is to work with the National Park Foundation and these two stellar Latinas, Naomi and Ruth, my dear friends, as a National Council board member, who are doing a phenomenal job in helping to promote and inspire the next generation of conservation stewards and advocates. And frankly, they're doing it through programs like the Latino Heritage Fund, which assist the Park Service in fulfilling their responsibility to tell the diverse stories that shaped our nation's past and frankly chart our future. Growing up in the Park Service for 30 years, I had the opportunity to have a front row seat for the 450th anniversary of the founding of our nation's oldest city in San Agustin, Florida. We have Castillo de San Marcos National Monument. Also to be a part of the 150th anniversary of the American Civil War. For the first time, the National Park Service, when I was a regional director in Atlanta and managed Civil War sites, were able to tell stories about our Latino ancestors that had not been told before. Fascinating stories. And you see American military figures, David Farragut, the first admiral in the United States Navy. David was the admiral that said, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." He was a Latino. And to learn about the first Latino to get the Medal of Honor, a Union soldier who fought at Gettysburg. Stories like that and many more that just opened, I know, my eyes and the eyes of many Latino children around the country. That's the value and importance of stories. That's the value and importance of the National Park Foundation and the Latino Heritage Program. Now, clearly the Park Service is facing many challenges as we go into a second century. I had the honor of sitting in the director's chair as we began a new second century of service. Issues such as urbanization and relevancy and disconnect from nature and transportation issues and climate change are all issues that the Park Service is going to be wrestling with for decades to come. But it's the National Park Foundation, Green Latinos, and all of the stakeholder organizations that are going to help the Park Service make the difference in preserving and protecting our nation's most special places. So from Castillo de San Marcos to San Antonio to Palo Alto Battlefield to Cesar Chavez National Monument, we can learn from our past because our past will help to influence the future of our Latino community for generations to come. You know, in retirement and with 7 grandkids and my wife of over 41 years, I look forward to inspiring the 3rd generation of Velas to wear the green and gray, but also of Latinos from around the country to be the next biologists, the cultural resource managers, superintendents, regional directors, and director of the National Park Service. We have that opportunity by way of this partnership that we've had for years with Green Latinos. And so I would urge all of my colleagues that are on this call to join us in this cause of protecting our nations and our Latino heritage and culture found in your national parks. So hopefully that gives a little background, a little perspective, and I look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. And for all of you again, Ruth is a power Latina, one of the few chief of staffs, period, on the Hill or with government related entities. But she's also a champion of Latinas and heritage conservation and Latino youth. And she has a special feather in her cap, so to speak. She had a role in ensuring the creation of the San Antonio Apprenticeship Program at the San Antonio National Historical Parks, the San Antonio Missions, which David spoke about. And I just wanted to ask you, Ruth, if you can speak a little bit of why the San Antonio Missions has a meaning to you and how that may have shaped your love of national parks and Latino heritage.
First of all, thank you, Noemi. David, although you're not on screen, it's always good to be with you, my friend and colleague.
Likewise. Thank you.
Noemi, you shared your parents' journey to the United States. My grandfather walked from Mexico City to a little central town in Texas and went to work for the railroads and married my grandmother, who had been in Texas for many generations, dating back hundreds of years. And he became a citizen along the way, my grandfather. So I'm 2nd generation, proudly Mexicano, Tejana. Mom and Dad had a similar habit as David shared with about his family. They would put my sister and me in our car, actually a Chevrolet. David, I remember it vividly. And every summer we would drive around to national parks. And we certainly loved the big landscape parks, Rocky Mountain sites in New Mexico, and they took us east to the Great Smokies, Everglades. But it was those cultural and historical sites that piqued my interest, and I began to, as David said, search for where I fit in. Where was my story? How could I see myself in these really amazing places? And so, fast forward all these years, and I find myself really in the job that I'm most proud of through my professional career, having the opportunity to advance the philanthropic efforts to save these and preserve these special places for forever. But to be able to circle back to a place as special as the San Antonio missions. My aunts lived in San Antonio, and we would go down and we would visit the missions, and then to be able to have the opportunity to place that Latina crew, to learn that apprentice, to participate in the apprentice program was just very special to me. I mean, it's a way for those special young women to see themselves, to see a career, to build confidence, to build leadership, and be doing it in a place and a space that had significance for them from a cultural and historical perspective. So just a little bit, Noemi, about why I'm so very proud of that program. And I can't wait for the opportunity to have funders where we can replicate that type of activity across the system. Because as David alluded to, there's hundreds of sites with a significant Latino perspective that we need to make certain is being told and shared.
So Ruth and David, can I briefly share that one of those Latinos or Latinas that came through the National Park Service Latino Heritage Internship Program is joined us in the room. She's saying hola and gracias from San Antonio Missions. Her name is Chantel Ruidante. And she actually is a hire at the San Antonio Missions National Historical Park. So she waves and says hi to you all. But that is an example of the wonderful work, right, of helping the next generation of Latinos, Latinx, Latinas become national park employees. One of the very interesting pieces that many Latino leaders have told us they didn't know is that they did not know there are 24 Latino heritage sites. There are 24 Latino heritage sites, and all of you can go to nationalparks.org and look for Latino Heritage Fund site, and it will give you an entire listing of those 24 Latino heritage sites. But there's a but, and this is something that David can speak to. David, can you share a little bit more about that Latino footprint that spans beyond those 24 heritage sites? If you can hear us. David, you're on mute. We can't hear you. So one of the things, if we can get David back on the voice and screen, one of the things that David talks about and spoke about during his role as acting director for the National Park Service is the Latino footprint across almost half of the nation's national parks. And really what he refers to, and many historians refer to, right, is that Latino history, whether it came through Florida or through Tejas, right, the American Southwest, expanded all the way up to Wyoming. And so many of our sites, right, national parks, have history that either detail and document the Spanish migration, the Mexicano migration, the first births of mestizos, if you will, or even Afro-Latinos. The first Afro-Latinos are documented to have been born in association with Castillo de San Marcos and Fort Matanzas. David, are you there? No? Okay. And we are getting a great deal of information. Chantel just shared some information about the San Antonio missions, a link there if any of you want to learn more. But one of the, beyond the history in getting Latinos, green Latinos involved with national parks is specifically getting us to become more engaged and aware of these Latino heritage sites, right? So whether you are in Texas with the San Antonio missions, and that is a UNESCO site, or I saw many people in the chat room list that they're logged in from California and have visited many national parks, right? How many of you know that several of those national parks are actually Latino heritage sites? And are part of documenting the Latino presence in the United States. If Mariana doesn't mind me sharing, and Mariana is with one of the Green Latinos policy leads, she mentioned to me that she lives in Monterey Park, California, and that did not know that there's a Cesar Chavez Park, National Historic Park, right? These Latino sites would like to connect with some of you Green Latinos individually and as organizations. And there are opportunities to create friends groups which support these national parks. But beyond that, become also involved in volunteers in telling the Latino history and that Latino footprint. Specifically with the National Parks Foundation, there is a program that was created 10 years ago called the Latino Heritage Fund Program. And it is designed to do just that, help fund the Latino heritage sites. And it's an interesting, David, can I get off mute? I don't know if the tech person is there and can help us with that. I will try to message him. These Latino heritage sites, the more funding and support we can get to them, the more equipped we can get them to provide bilingual services, right, to our growing Latino and Spanish speaking community and inmigrantes, and the more engagement with Latino programming that we can create. So your support with that is also helpful. With Ruth, with your role specifically as Chief of Staff, and you do have, for a variety of reasons, the world on your shoulders, right? Part of being an influencer and being in the rooms with power people within the board and the National Park Service, can you communicate a little bit about the commitment and support that the National Park Foundation leadership has towards Latinos and cultural resources in general?
I'd be happy to, Noemi. It's been a joy to work with David as he was serving as acting director of the Park Service, and then his predecessor, John Jarvis. John and David were both 40-year veterans of the National Park Service and had a deep understanding of all the types of parks, not just the big landscapes that we've talked about, but also these the battlefields, the places of valor, the history and cultural sites that we've been talking about. One of the things they both did very intentionally with our board and our donors was to make certain we weren't just going to Yellowstone, although we all love Yellowstone, but that we were also finding time to go to Dr. Martin Luther King's birth home in Atlanta, going to Lowell, Massachusetts to learn about textile, to going to Gettysburg, going to all these various places to expose our board and funders to the vast array of parks and monuments, so that we could generate enthusiasm and raise private philanthropy to provide that margin of excellence, Noemi, at the parks. Because as we all know, federal dollars just aren't sufficient to address all the needs. And so where private philanthropy can step in and play that role, that public-private partnership, and leverage the federal funds, we have found the partnership to be incredibly successful. But it is like programs such as you've just been describing, the Latino Heritage Fund, that we educate our board about these. We talk about the apprentice program. We talk about where we could, if we had an additional $100,000 or $500,000, what we might be doing at these sites to enhance the visitor experience. So that's just a little way through educating and through personal visits that we seek to advance the work at these sites. David, I think, is back off mute, and so can probably talk some more about this.
Yeah, there are, in addition to the sites that Naomi and Ruth have talked about, it's quite the experience when you're able to walk into onto Cesar's footprint, or to walk into one of the missions in San Antonio, or to walk through the Castillo de San Marcos in San Agustin. But the Park Service and the foundation are bigger than that, because they're also about programming. We talked about youth development, and Chantel is one of those byproducts of those efforts, and is the future of the Park Service. And programs like that give people of diverse backgrounds, of nationalities, an opportunity, one, to become acclimated to the green and gray of the Park Service, but also how we do business, but equally important, marketing and networking, so that they come on and they have opportunities to gain permanent employment and be part of the federal workforce and federal family. So programmings are equally important. Social media is equally important in the Park Service, of how we reach out and engage communities of color, especially during anniversary dates. The 250th anniversary of the founding of our nation is the biggest opportunity we are going to have in generations to tell our stories. Think about it. What role did Latinos, our community, play in the founding of our nation? Can you imagine the different storylines that we have a chance, from the indigenous storylines, peoples, to our Latino community, to Spain, to Mexico, and others that contributed to building this nation we call home? And so, like we did in the sesquicentennial of the Civil War, like we did in the 19th Amendment, the celebration of the right to vote, and like we did in the 450th anniversary of the founding of our nation's oldest city. So whether it's programs, whether it's youth development, whether it's parks, these are a conglomerate of opportunities for us to connect with our community, our Latino community. And we need you to be a part of this process.
If I may, there is a question from the chat. And David or Ruth, any one of you can chime in. But Jennifer Lopez Valdez wants to know, for heritage sites that are in the National Park System, how can they be made more accessible to low-income Latinx communities that don't have disposable income for entry fees? And
Yeah.
if I may start with that one, San Antonio Missions, as an example, right, is in downtown San Antonio.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
And so there are many heritage sites that are, number one, directly accessible in our nearby communities, and we don't know. If you live in Los Angeles, how many of you have gone to Olvera Street? Did you know that Olvera, La Placita Olvera, is a heritage management, or heritage monument, rather? That's an example. And Chantel Ruidante who from San Antonio Mission says that right now they're free, right? But beyond that, there is a constant question about accessibility for low-income community members, and what can be done by advocates on the advocacy side, right, for them, and playing in that role and ensuring that there is equitable access. David, you were going to chime in?
Yeah, no, and Chantel talked about it in San Antonio. Their park fee-free days in the national parks throughout the course of the year, and you can just Google that and find out when those days are available. There are opportunities for veterans for free admittance in the national parks. I assume, Ruth, we still have every kid in the park, the fourth grade programs that are still funded for fourth graders to provide access into national parks. But that is, I think, Noemi, that is one of the biggest challenges. Serving as a superintendent in an iconic park in the American West, we didn't see a lot of Latinos. However, in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, 30% of the population of Jackson Hole, think about it, look like you and me.
Yeah.
Yet 2% of that 30% population had not gone up to Grand Teton National Park, 8 miles up the road from Jackson Hole. So the park created a program as an example called Pura Vida that not only provided free access into the national park for Latino kids in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, but taught them life skills, camping skills, backcountry. They had wilderness excursions, and all this was provided free of charge, and is a program that's still underway. And there's similar programs around the country in national parks to do the same. So engagement is extremely important, and the foundation helps us to do that, to have that engagement in Latino communities and diverse communities around the country.
And I will share that Chantel Ruidante, again from San Antonio Mission, says that anyone with a disability, any kind of disability, can get a free lifetime pass to all federal lands.
Absolutely.
Okay? So this is why it's important also to know who our Latino or Latinx colleagues are in the National Park Service and other public lands. There are multiple ways that Green Latinos, both as individuals and as organizations, can become involved as stewards, right? Advocates, as voices on national parks. Whether it's connecting to heritage sites or at the federal level, becoming more involved with their legislators, right? Or simply, and this would be great, becoming involved with friends groups. But I wanted to ask, starting with you, Ruth, as the Power Latina that you are, and the work that you are, it's true, right? And the work that you've already done championing Latino youth and Latinas and heritage conservation, what is one of the visions that you would like to see be accomplished during this respective administration? And then we'll go to David with the same question.
Well, one of the things we know that is important to this administration and something that's important to the Park Service, the Interior Department, and to us is how we address climate change and the effects that it's having on our national parks. Glaciers receding, enormous fires that are causing devastation to wildlife and species habitat. So the ability to bring those issues to the forefront of the philanthropists across the country, to encourage their participation in, as I mentioned earlier, providing that margin of excellence, funding academic studies to better understand the effects of climate change, a warming environment, if you will. Sea rise out here where I'm sitting in DC in the tidal basin, and the effects on the Jefferson and the FDR memorials. These are some of the opportunities that we like to champion. We like to talk about this as an opportunity where private philanthropy can make a difference and give Park Service additional funds to address some of these very, very critical opportunities. And may I also say that sort of opportunity exists in the historical and cultural sites as well, making certain, just as Chantel is doing, that we're preserving those important aquifers at the San Antonio Mission, that we're making certain that the important birth homes of some of our civil rights icons are there for forever. So these are some opportunities that we hope to be pursuing jointly with this administration, and as we have with the administrations of the past.
Thank you. David, what would you like to see accomplished during this administration?
I think that there's a willingness and desire to reach out to all communities, and I applaud that. Any administration, irrespective of the political arena that they operate in, will always have my attention when they have a sincere commitment to do that. One of the things that I enjoyed the most was going through critical planning processes, whether they were NEPA, Section 106, whatever the planning process was reaching out to our tribal communities and communities of color to get their voice. Believe me, I was a superintendent in 4 national parks and a regional director managing 66 and acting director managing over 419. The voice of our communities are extremely important that help us to make management decisions that impact how we address climate change, how we address invasive species, how do we address all the prevailing issues facing our nation's most special places. Without these voices, it's extremely difficult for a manager to do it effectively. So Green Latinos and stakeholder organizations play a critical role in adding their voice to these processes. They're important and they're needed.
And I will share with you, I'm Juan Roberto Madrid posted something in the chat stating that there is a challenge in the reservation system for camping at national parks that deserves attention during this administration. He points out the pandemic has highlighted the importance of green nature and blue spaces, right, for public health, and has pointed out some concerns that exist in Colorado. But that's exactly it, right? So Juan Roberto Madrid, how do we get you to come in and be a voice on some of those issues, right? I will state myself, Noemi, one of the things that I would like to see during this administration is Green Latinos pull in Latino heritage sites as a policy area of concern for the coalition as a whole, right? Oftentimes, there's a broad range of issues and areas that should be addressed, from NEPA, as David mentioned, to the reservation system. But overall, part of it is just pulling in Latino heritage sites as a policy area of interest, to protect and preserve and really just advocate for those particular sites in particular, and national parks as a whole. So I wanted to throw that in there. I did want to open it up to the audience to see if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, or even Chantel Ruidante, if she would like to provide any additional information about San Antonio missions and her team's respective interests of wanting to connect to Green Latinos in San Antonio. Preguntas, hay preguntas. También podemos hablar en español, so si tienen preguntas en español, los podemos contestar. We can speak Spanish. If you have questions in Spanish, we can answer them too. Okay. One of the last pieces of information that we will share, again, the website is www.nationalparks.org. And within the nationalparks.org, there is a page called Latino Heritage Fund Program. Do visit it. Do look at the list of 24 Latino heritage sites. You will be surprised at some of the sites on there. One of the national parks is in Wyoming, believe it or not. But we also want you, as you continue to push forward and work with embracing the indigenous work that is being championed by Secretary Holland and the new director of the National Park Service, who is the first tribal citizen or Native American director for national parks, to see how you can also bridge that interest with Latino heritage sites. Again, many of these sites, as David has mentioned and Ruth have mentioned, document both indigenous, right, and Spanish sites, and the creation of what is Latinos and Latinidad. How can we be better or help the National Park Service be better at communicating our stories? We will also make sure that through the Green Latinos team, that there is a pamphlet of information that is forwarded to Green Latino participants about Latino heritage sites, so that you can learn more about them and the Latino Heritage Fund Program and National Parks Foundation. Do you have any parting last words, Ruth or David?
David?
No, other than I'll begin. I'll end where I started, and to thank my dear friend Mark Magana and the entire Green Latinos Network and family for the awesome work that you continue to do. Stay the course. It's going to be difficult in the decades ahead. The challenges are many, But hey, hermano, it's good to see you.
Hey, wanted to say hello.
But I am confident that the Green Latino family is going to continue to rise to the challenge. And as a retiree, I will add my voice to that conversation. Just thank you for the opportunity to have this workshop and to talk with the family. Greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you, David. I was told that you wore a suit for this occasion. No wonder you didn't put your camera on.
Only for you, Mark. Only for you.
Oh, I'll believe it. Next time I'll keep my camera off and say the same. But thank you, Noemi. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, David, for this wonderful breakout session on Latino heritage sites. There's so much we have to learn, and so much we have to push to increase access and the numbers of the sites that we have for our community to enjoy their culture, their history. My kids' kids, to be able to understand where we came from. I talked a little bit about that. The sacrifices our grandparents made for us and our parents made for us are the sacrifices that we need to make now for our future generations. So thank you for this conversation, and thank everyone.
I look forward to working with you, Mark and Rosemary.
Yes.
I would just like to echo him. An incredible group of people here. It's so wonderful for me to have the experience of being here with you, sharing this moment, hearing about your work. So thank you for being here once again. And we mean it from the bottom of our hearts. Spaces, the outdoors, the parks are so important for our community, for Latinos, for every person on this planet, and thank you for your experience in connecting us to nature, your efforts, and your incredible work there.
And Mark, see Ruth? Establish that face. You see her? That's right. This is important. So thank you all. And thank you all very much to those of you who are in the audience. Thank you.